In this video, I'll share 7 things that you should do in the springtime to set your garden up for success. Spring is an exciting time for gardeners, but it's also the busiest time of year. There's a lot to do. We've got seed starting and seedling care indoors, transitioning plants outdoors, getting your garden beds ready, and so on. So in this video, I wanted to share 7 of the things that I think are most important to be doing during the springtime. Jumping right in with number 1, which is to keep your seeds moist during germination. This applies if you're starting anything from seed, whether it be indoors in seed cells or direct sowing outdoors. Seeds need to remain moist all the way through until they sprout. Indoors, we come through once a day or so and just spritz the surface of the soil. This is a pump sprayer, or you can just use a normal hand sprayer with some water. And a lot of times what will happen is some of your seedlings will sprout, like you see here. We have these pepper seedlings sprouted, but a couple of them haven't come up yet. So it's important to come through and look for any empty cells where you need to keep that soil damp. And of course, if you're starting a lot of seeds at the same time, a humidity dome is hugely important. It goes on top of your seed starting trays and just keeps the environment highly humid until most of your seedlings have sprouted. I'd like to come through and open up the humidity domes once a day or so and just check for any dry spots, give them a spritz, and then cover them back up. This, by the way, has been a great investment. It's a pump sprayer, so you build up a little bit of pressure in there with the water, and then you just press a button to spray some gentle water, and you can easily just aim it wherever you need it, and it will spray for a long duration. These can become very fatiguing to use over time, spraying over and over and over again. It feels like your wrist is about to fall off, so I'll leave a link to this in the description below. Highly recommended. Number 2 is to succession sow some of your crops. Lettuce is the perfect example here. I have some lettuce that I started about 2 weeks ago, and I also have some lettuce seeds that I just started today so that I'll have a nice steady supply of lettuce on an ongoing basis throughout the season. So early in the season, you can start succession sowing leafy greens like lettuce and spinach, Swiss chard, even things like carrots and beets. And then moving into the warmer season crops, you can succession sow cucumbers, bush beans, and even corn. And then certain herbs like cilantro and dill are great to succession sow, and even basil if you run into disease issues with those plants, or if they go to flower too early, you can have another round of basil to come into the garden and replace your older plants. But really, the whole idea is to space out your harvests, and this all starts with planting your seeds at the right time. So planting on a continual basis will then lead to continual harvests later on. Number 3, I'm gonna call the trifecta of seedling care indoors. We have a ton of seedlings behind me, and it can be a lot of work to take care of all these different plants. But the basics are watering, lighting, and fertilizing. Watering is pretty straightforward. I like to bottom water seedlings when they're in cells like this. You can also bottom water larger pots like this. It makes it very easy to water a large number of plants. Just fill your trays with about 1/2 inch of water and allow the soil to wick up that moisture and water all your plants at once. One quick tip on watering, use room temperature water. It's common to have very cold tap water this time of year in the earlier spring. So make sure you let your water come up to room temperature before watering. A lot of times you'll see your plants sort of slump over after using ice cold water. It's very easy to make that mistake. Another quick tip on knowing when to water is to lift up your plants and get used to the weight of the pots when they're fully watered. They'll be a lot heavier when they're fully saturated than they are when they're completely bone dry. So that's a good way to know when to water individual plants. Lighting is also very important once your seeds sprout. We use grow lights and highly recommend using them. It makes a big difference in how quickly your plants will grow. You can hook your grow lights up to a timer, have them go on for 14 to 16 hours per day. Whereas if you have your plants in a sunny window, you're relying on the weather, which may be overcast for a week and then sunny for a week. And in the early spring, there are just not as many hours of daylight as there are in midsummer. And fertilizing, we actually just released a video about fertilizing seedlings, when you should start and how often to do it. It's not all that complicated though. Your plants do need fertilizer pretty shortly after sprouting. So if you're using a potting soil that has nutrients added, you don't really have anything to worry about. There should be enough nutrients in the soil to get them through to the next stage of transplanting outdoors. If you're using seed starter mix, you might need to add some fertilizer. So choose a nice all-purpose fertilizer and fertilize those seedlings on a regular basis until they move into their final planting location. Number 4 is to monitor for pests. And I'm picking up this plant because I saw some suspicious activity on one of these leaves here. You can see it's kind of curled and misshapen. And I did take a closer look, and I don't think that pests are to blame here, But if you see any funny business on your indoor plants, it's very important to look closely and see if you have the early stages of an infestation, especially indoors. The most common pests you'll likely see indoors are fungus gnats, which we definitely have on an annual basis. You can see behind me we have these yellow sticky traps hanging above our plants. Those are capturing the adult fungus gnats, slowing down their reproductive cycle. Other pests to be on the lookout for are aphids, whiteflies, and thrips. We've had all of these indoors at one point or another, and any of them are going to need treatment eventually if you have them indoors. I won't go into too much detail about how to deal with these pests, but essentially there are no beneficial insects indoors to consume them, like ladybugs or lacewing larvae. None of these things are just naturally living indoors like they are outside, so you'll have to use some other measure to take care of them inside. If you see some pests outside, that's where I say just kind of hold off and let nature take its path. A lot of times ladybugs and their larvae will come along and take care of a problem for you, especially aphids. That's one of their favorite things to consume. So by taking away the aphids, you may actually take away some of the beneficials and end up with a worse problem in the end. But again, the first step is detection. So check your plants on a regular basis, see if you see any tiny insects crawling around, and identify them as soon as possible. Now we move outside for number 5, which is to start hardening off your plants as soon as possible. If you're not familiar, hardening off is the process of bringing your plants outside gradually rather than immediately. If you take a seedling that's only grown indoors under grow lights and put it out directly into the garden in full sun, that plant will have a hard time transitioning. It will likely have burnt leaves, and it's best to avoid that if possible. And the way you do that is on warm days in the spring, you can bring your trays of seedlings outside for maybe an hour or two on the first day, then bring them back indoors under grow lights, and then repeat the process every day, increasing the time they are outdoors until they can handle full sun and the outdoor elements. There are other factors that they'll experience like wind and precipitation, which they're not used to getting indoors. This usually takes maybe a week or two. It is pretty laborious, so having some trays to move your plants around makes it a lot easier. My best advice for hardening off is to start on a cloudy day, so you don't have to worry about direct sunlight, which can be pretty harsh on your plants. That overcast weather is perfect to transition your seedlings outdoors, and after a couple of days of this shadier weather, you can give them some direct sunlight and increase from there. But just as important is to start as soon as possible. Like I said, today it's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's perfectly fine for these peppers here and many other vegetables. Some other veggies can go outside a lot earlier, like lettuce or other cool season crops. You can get them outdoors when it's in the 50s and start the hardening off process even earlier. Number 6 is to amend your garden soil. This is especially important if you're growing in raised beds or directly in the ground. If you're growing in containers, typically you're going to be using potting soil. But some of these amendments can still be applied if you're growing in containers, especially if you're reusing your potting soil from a previous year. But for in-ground beds and raised beds, I highly recommend doing a soil test if you haven't already. Even doing it just once can tell you a lot that you should know about your garden soil. It's really exciting getting those results back, and the process is a lot easier than you might think. And with those results, you'll learn what is actually needed in the ground. The only thing that is almost guaranteed to be necessary though is nitrogen. So I at least recommend putting something into your soil with nitrogen like blood meal or something similar that provides nitrogen to the soil. If you don't want to do a soil test, I totally understand. There are some things you can definitely add safely, like compost and rotted manures. Those are great amendments that add nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to your soil. You can also use a slow-release granular fertilizer. I wouldn't recommend anything that has too high of a phosphate number. That's the middle number on the NPK rating, which you'll find on these soil amendments. This is because phosphate gets locked up in soil. It doesn't wash away the way nitrogen does, so adding too much can actually become toxic to your plants over time. But spring is the perfect time to be amending your soil. I like to do it maybe 2 to 3 weeks before putting the plants into the raised beds or into the ground. Scratch it into the first couple inches of soil and give it some time to start breaking down. And the final thing I want to recommend is definitely something you don't hear too often, but that is to pre-warm your soil for warm season crops to be transplanted. Peppers are a great example, but also tomatoes and eggplants, and then also things like cucumbers and melons, especially like warm soil. So you can get those crops out much earlier by pre-warming your garden soil And the way you do this is by using plastic mulch. The best option is actually clear plastic, and you might worry about weeds. The greenhouse effect will cause that area underneath the plastic to heat up the soil so much that it can actually kill off weed seedlings and seeds, so you don't really have to worry too much about weeds. It's going to warm the soil much faster than it naturally would, allowing you to transplant those warm season crops much sooner. If you want to give this a shot, a couple of pointers. The first one is to make sure that you pre-moisten your soil before you put the plastic down. The water in the soil will hold on to that warmth much better than the air particles in the soil, so that when it does come time to transplant, your soil will stay nice and warm even on the odd colder night. And then also when you're laying down plastic, it's important to sort of seal the edges so that wind can't blow through and blow out all of the warm air that's underneath. You want to sort of trap the heat underneath the plastic, so I like to bury the edges of the plastic with garden soil to keep it nice and sealed. So what are you waiting for? Get out into the garden and put some of these tips to use. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, leave a like and a comment down below. Thanks for watching Geeky Greenhouse, and I'll see you next time.